One of these things is not like the others. One of these things doesn't belong.
I don't know how else to start this video. Here is an EVO lens, here's another EVO lens, here's another EVO lens, and then we have this, and it's also an EVO lens. Should they have started a new line? It really doesn't look like the other EVO lenses. It looks more closely related to this tiny Viltrox 28mm f4.5 pancake that was the highlight of 2024. And I really don't know what Viltrox is doing here, but I like it. Just when you thought that you had a predictable trajectory of expectations, Viltrox does a barrel roll in the other direction just to make sure that you have a pulse. This is the brand new Viltrox 26mm f2.8 EVO. It is a full frame pancake lens that has a proper aperture ring, a brighter f2.8 aperture, a pretty serious overall design. It also has the best magnetic lens cap I've ever tested, so that's already 4 or 5 big steps in the right direction. In this video, I will show you around this lens, show you what performance looks like, and discuss whether this is a lens that you can buy and super glue to your full frame camera and forego all others in the process. Now, before I get into it, Viltrox is sponsoring this video and did provide me with this lens for free for testing purposes. As always, they are not going to see this video before it goes live, so you guys are seeing it at the exact same time that they are. They don't tell me what to say or what not to say, and I will not be withholding anything in this review. I will show you the good, the bad, and the ugly, and all of it. So let's begin. Now, I'll start by saying I messed up a little bit already because I recently purchased this brand new Sony a7 IV full frame camera with the idea of fully retiring my trusty old Sony a7C, and I did not buy the Sony a7 V, and that's a discussion for another video. And while it looks small on this full frame body, when I put it on the a7C, it looks like the ideal match, if only they had a silver version. All of the samples in this video are from the Sony a7 IV, however. With whatever camera you end up using or whatever camera you own, if your goal really is to get a super compact setup that you can take with you more often than your bulkier camera lenses, but you think that there are too many compromises with the 28mm f4.5, i.e. the flaring and the darker aperture, this little pancake lens might be the answer. This 26mm weighs 130 grams. It's about an inch long, 23.8 millimeters if you aren't in the US, and it's a nice combination of glass and plastic and some metal. Does it feel as high-end as a Sigma Art lens? No, but does it feel better than the 28mm pancake released 2 years ago? Definitely. It has a metal mount, USB-C port for firmware updates, a little rubber gasket for weather sealing, and even a nice red EVO badge right here. There is an aperture ring that moves smoothly with nice subtle clicks, but this is the first mistake that Viltrox made. With the other EVO lenses, you rotate all the way to the left for wide open. Here you rotate the opposite direction, and that is odd because from the top they could have flipped the numbers so that you could read 2.4, then 4, then 5.6, and beyond, left to right, so it's something that you do have to get used to. The manual focus ring is very thin, flush with the body of the lens, so it isn't easy to rotate, but I think most aren't going to ever use the manual focus ring anyway. Around the front, well, if you thought that this lens should be smaller, well, you are in luck. This is a lens hood. You can remove it and it shaves about a ½ inch off of the length of the lens, maybe a little bit less, and a bunch of lens specs are here. Viltrox logo, a 43mm front filter thread, and that filter thread is built into the lens hood. So if you put an ND filter on it, you would be mounting it to the lens hood itself. Inside there is a gear style STM stepper autofocus motor, which is pretty quiet, although not absolutely silent. So appearance wise, it is nothing like the other EVO lenses that we've seen released over the last year or so. However, it is a more premium pancake lens than other pancake lenses out there, and we have needed pancake lenses. I wish that this was for APS-C, but hey, I'm happy for you guys who shoot full frame out there. If you have Sony E or Nikon Z, that is, because those are the only two mount options at launch. Sorry, Canon. Now, the other interesting choice here is the focal length. We are used to seeing 24mm primes and 28mm primes, but 26mm is right in the middle of those two. It's wide enough for travel, for interior shots, for landscapes, for architecture, but it's not as dramatic or exaggerated as, let's say, a 20mm. It's also significantly wider than the typical 35mm lenses that we see street photographers live and die by. And if you look at Leica, some of those guys really like the wider focal length. So maybe this is Viltrox's attempt to recreate what Leica fans have uncovered, but for perhaps the more rationally price-conscious photographers out there. But before I get into optics, I was curious, as I'm sure many of you are, how it compares to that 28mm. So here are some side-by-side photos. I'll start with them one at a time. Here is the old 28mm chip lens, and here is the new 26mm. I'll go back and forth here so that you'll see even at the wider framing, there is more subject separation with the 26mm at f2.8, and that makes sense because f2.8 is 2 stops brighter than f4.5. In terms of center sharpness, they are really close, but as you move out to the background, there is a noticeable difference in bokeh in terms of size and smoothness. Another picture here, and again, sharpness is about the same. You'll notice that there is more in focus with the f4.5 lens. Rendering is a little bit different, so pick your style. In terms of absolute sharpness, stop down to f4.5, the new 26mm EVO is noticeably sharper in the center of the frame and in the edges of the frame, but for some this difference won't be that drastic. But if you want better, this 26mm EVO certainly is, not only from a control standpoint where it has physical controls, but also from an optics standpoint. It is still a tiny lens, so it has compromises, but in general, the optics are strong. Center sharpness wide open is excellent. The corners are a touch softer and certainly darker, but at f4 and beyond, they are perfectly bright and sharp across the frame. In fact, this lens is basically just as sharp in the center of the frame, at least, wide open as it is stop down all the way to f8. Only the corners improve at f4, and I didn't notice much of an improvement beyond that. There is some barrel distortion, which is a stylistic thing and will probably be taken care of with a future profile, but some people like a little bit of barrel distortion for storytelling purposes. The biggest optical issue with this lens, however, is the flaring. Even with the tiny lens hood attached, shooting into the sun, and especially if your subject is wearing black, it makes for a not so pleasant combination. There are some flare elements and some color swatches that just don't look the best, in addition to the loss of contrast that you can pretty clearly see. Close focusing is excellent with this lens. I got some great shots of little flowers up close, as minimum focus is only 0.66 feet. Chromatic aberrations are very well controlled, but there is some loca or longitudinal chromatic aberrations on out of focus high contrast areas, so you'll see some green and purple fringing at times, and there is some focus breathing, not drastic, but it is there if you are racking focus from one subject to another. The bokeh quality also not the best I've seen. There is a little bit of texture and kind of onion ringing at times that you see, but it's also pretty difficult to get this sort of size of bokeh balls unless you are very, very close to your subject. Overall, I would describe this as a significant step up over the 28mm f4.5 pancake. The f2.8 aperture means you can use a lower ISO or a faster shutter speed in low light, and it gives you at least some ability to separate a subject. This isn't going to give you the same look as, let's say, a 35mm f1.4 lens will, but that's really not the point. This is an ultra compact, ultra useful everyday lens, and although it's not designed for it, this lens makes perhaps even more sense on an APS-C censored camera because you will get a roughly 39mm field of view, which is great for street and portrait work, and I think, I'm just guessing now because I have no idea, I think that lens probably is going to be released sometime soon. So who is this lens for? Well, I think it makes the most sense for someone who has a small full-frame camera, such as this one, but doesn't always want to carry around that bulky 24-70. This lens makes your camera compact without the compromise of the f4.5 aperture. For travel photography, this is brilliant. It's unobtrusive and it really attracts almost no attention out in the wild. This lens doesn't make your full frame Sony into something the size of, let's say, the Ricoh GR, but if you already own the camera body, this is a much cheaper proposition than going out and buying another dedicated camera with a fixed lens on it just for a similar experience. This 26mm EVO is launching today at $299 in the US, which is triple the price of the 28mm Pancake. Compared to first-party prime lenses, however, $299 is very affordable, but whether it is worth it or not is largely dependent on what you value. If you want the absolute smallest lens possible and you shoot mostly outside, the 28mm f4.5 is really hard to beat, especially for the money. But if you want a compact lens that you can use indoors, for close-up details, for video work, and in a much wider range of situations, the 26mm f2.8 is the more capable lens. So what is Viltrox doing? Well, I have no clue. At least I have no clue about where this EVO line is going. This lens appears to be an outlier, but also might be the start of something that's absolutely brilliant. It's not just a slightly thicker version of the 28mm f4.5. The brighter aperture, the control rings, the close focus, magnetic cap, filter support, and overall build makes this a more practical lens, and maybe that's the idea. Maybe EVO is just about offering a solid compromise of size, build, optics, and price. I'm excited to see if we get a little pancake lens like this for APS-C, because that would be brilliant. Maybe we'll finally get that replacement for the old Sony 16mm and 20mm f2.8s that are now, what, 15 years old. Anyway, if you want to read more about this lens, if you want to check out pricing, and also I should say that there is a nice discount code down in the description and in the comments below, so please use that to save a nice chunk of change on the purchase of this lens if you guys decide that this is a lens that you want to purchase. It becomes a much better value with that discount. And let me know down in the comments what you think of this 26mm and whether you would choose it over the smaller and significantly cheaper 28mm. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.